Next Saturday, we have a stacked UFC Fight Night card. I'm specifically talking about the Abu Dhabi card. We finally have a promising Fight Night card, which is awesome because the last 3 weeks, aside from this pay-per-view event, has been mostly disappointing. But now we have a stacked ass card coming up, and I'm really looking forward to it, especially the main event. However, today I wanted to focus on the first fight on the main card, which is Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chiesa. This is arguably the saddest part of this event. And if that wasn't bad enough, at one point we had Nick Diaz versus Vicente Luque on this card too. You know how depressing that is? That's depressing because Nick Diaz is past his prime and kind of washed, and Vicente Luque hasn't been the same since his brain injury. And you guys have no idea how glad I was when I found out that this fight got canceled. I believe it's because Nick had visa issues, but honestly, I'm just glad to see it cancel. I couldn't handle seeing both of them lose in the same card. That would just tore me up. Too bad Tony is fighting in this card still, man. And trust me when I say this, I'm actually really hoping this fight gets canceled at the last minute because it's not going to end well for Tony. Tony does not stand a chance against Michael Chiesa, and it's sad to say that because at one point during his prime, where he wasn't washed up, he probably would have easily beat Chiesa. We all remember prime Tony, his relentless volume, his unlimited cardio, his great jiu-jitsu skills. Tony was a beast, but obviously he's not that fighter anymore, and I think Chiesa is just gonna steamroll this guy. And I've even seen some delusional people online saying that this is a winnable fight for Tony, but honestly, it's very unlikely. Tony has been looking worse with every fight. The last glimpse of the old prime Tony was when he fought Michael Chandler. Tony was clearly stunning and rocking Chandler, and it was an amazing moment. But all of that has faded away when he got front kicked in the face and knocked out. Since then, we haven't even seen Tony come close to being that good again. And I'm done pretending otherwise. And as much as it pains me to say this, Tony Ferguson is going to lose again. His current 7-fight losing streak is about to become an 8-fight losing streak. And if the UFC keeps letting him fight, it's likely to extend to a 12-fight losing streak. He's a shadow of his former self, and it's sad to watch. Despite what he thinks, he's not in his prime anymore, and trust me, he won't be getting a win anytime soon. And you can tell that this has affected Tony's mental state. You see, Tony's issue is realizing that he's human and that he could be knocked out after feeling invincible for so many years. Fear has overtaken El Kukui. This is evident because normally when he gets punched nowadays, he turns away. This trauma stems from the Justin fight, and perhaps only something like this can remind him of his unbreakable mindset. And I think that's why he was working out with David Goggins a while back. But the thing is, mental toughness was never his issue. He's arguably the toughest fighter in the UFC. The real problem is that he's a shadow of his former self. He looks skinnier than ever, possibly due to losing a lot of testosterone, especially with the intense workouts he's been doing with Goggins. Because if you didn't know, when you overtrain and when you get up there in age, you pretty much lose testosterone. With all that being said, the UFC should be ashamed of themselves for continuing to exploit Tony Ferguson. To me, it's quite shocking that the commission still allows him to compete. It's practically criminal. I mean, after all, it's quite evident that the dude has brain damage. Every time he steps into that cage, it kind of reminds me of Chuck Liddell in his later years. To me, it's disgraceful that the UFC knows fully well that Tony hasn't been fit to fight for a while, but they continue to let him fight. The argument that he chooses to is kind of nonsense in my opinion. Many fighters, especially those with Tony's mindset, need to protect themselves. Somebody from his camp needs to step in and put a stop to this. This has gone too far, but I doubt anyone has spoken up. And even if they have, Tony probably won't listen. He's dealing with a lot of demons, and obviously the dude has serious mental issues. It's kind of heartbreaking because I remember the days when Tony was a beast, but those days are long gone. Now, don't get me wrong, in a weird way, I'm definitely going to be like somewhat excited when this fight does happen because Tony is always entertaining during fight week, you know, with those crazy interviews and stuff, but we all know how it's going to end. He's either going to lose by unanimous decision or get knocked out or get submitted. I mean, when you get submitted by Bobby Green and outstruck by Patty, it's kind of hard to see him being good or a high-level fighter at all. That's why it annoys me that they gave him Michael Chiesa in the first place. They could have gave him like somebody like a Scrub or a Nick Diaz or somebody. That's why I don't really get the matchmaking on this. What is happening, man? And look, is it possible that Tony can catch Chiesa somehow? Sure, but I'm not counting on it. I know that Michael Chiesa is also washed up. Currently, he's on a 3-fight losing streak, but he's been losing to some high-level competition, like Kevin Holland, Sean Brady, and Vicente Luque, before the brain injury. It's not like Michael Chiesa was just getting folded by freaking Bobby Green or Patty. I think Chiesa is decent at best. He's a good gatekeeper, but I think he's good enough to beat Tony. And I'll give Tony this. I think he has a striking advantage in this fight at 170. Tony has shown that he has some serious power back in the Ultimate Fighter days. He used to fight at 170 at that time, and he was dropping and knocking out people. And power is the last thing to go, so Tony could use this to potentially win this fight. Chiesa's striking is horrendous, so it's entirely possible that Tony can go in there and finish him, and it would be crazy, but I doubt that's going to happen. And I also want to mention that Michael has a huge size advantage in this fight. I don't even know how he was fighting in the lightweight division at one point, but he's a giant welterweight. Chiesa has an edge in the offensive grappling against most of his opponents, and he's definitely going to have that in this fight too. I mean, this guy outgrappled guys like RDA and Neil Magny, although to be fair, the Neil Magny fight wasn't really competitive, and Magny isn't really exactly a top tier fighter. At the same time, this guy does tend to fumble the bag. He's been submitted by Anthony Pettis, Vicente Luque, and Jorge Masvidal. The more I think about it, Chiesa is kind of like a roll of dice, You never really know what you're going to get with him. Plus, he hasn't been active for like over a year. He seems like someone who isn't as hungry as he used to be, and we literally saw him give up in his last fight against Kevin Holland. But even with all that being said, I still think Chiesa is just too big for Tony Ferguson. He's too strong, and at this point in his career, Tony is weak, and he's going to get manhandled by Chiesa. Chiesa is just a huge welterweight, and I can see him ragdolling Tony, and realistically finishing him in the first round. The only way I see Tony wins this is if he catches Chiesa early. And I know I said it's unlikely, but still possible because Michael Chiesa's stand-up game is terrible. He's a prime example of a grappler with a lousy striking. And yeah, I know he dropped Masvidal 7 years ago, but I can't remember the last time he dropped someone else. Every time he tries to stand and bang, he gets tagged up. But realistically, here's how I think the fight will go down. Tony will start off with his usual unpredictable style. Maybe he'll even throw some sand in Chiesa's eye and land a big punch to hurt him. Tony will then rush in, but Chiesa will shoot for a takedown and get Tony on the ground because Tony's takedown defense is pretty weak and non-existent at this point. Chiesa will control him in half guard for a few minutes before securing an arm triangle. And look, man, I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping somehow Tony literally knocks him out at the beginning of the round and rides off to the sunset. I would love nothing more than to see that happen. That would be an amazing moment, but I just don't see Tony winning. With all that being said, how do you guys think this fight is going to play out? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, I'll see you guys on my next one.